Lucifer, as preserved in Ethiopian texts, was never meant to be the name of a cosmic villain. In the Ethiopian Bible, this word of light carried poetry, warning, and moral weight long before it was reshaped by later theology. For centuries, we've been told a single story about Lucifer, a fallen angel, a rebel cast from heaven, the ruler of hell. But what if that story is not as ancient as we think? What if it is the result of translation, distance, and imagination layered over time? High in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, Christianity took root early, quietly, and differently. In monasteries carved from stone, scribes preserved scriptures in Ge'ez, translated not through Latin but through Hebrew and Greek. In those texts, Lucifer does not appear as a personal devil. He appears as an image, a fallen light, a warning spoken to kings, empires, and anyone who mistakes brilliance for divinity. Stay until the end, because the meaning preserved in Ethiopian tradition does not erase evil, it reframes it. And that shift changes how rebellion, pride, and redemption are understood. This is not a story about defending Lucifer. It is a story about recovering an older lens, one where the danger is not a monster lurking in the dark, but the quiet moment when created light forgets its source. If this perspective challenges what you have always assumed, leave a comment with just one word: light, pride, humility. And if you value deep dives into ancient texts, forgotten traditions, and the roots of belief, consider liking this video and subscribing. These stories survive only because they are remembered. Before Lucifer became a name whispered with fear, it was a word spoken with awe. It meant Lightbearer, morning star, a phrase drawn from poetry, not from horror. And that distinction matters more than we are usually told. The earliest layers of scripture did not introduce Lucifer as a character with a biography. They offered an image, a brief, luminous metaphor that appeared and vanished within a prophetic poem. Yet over centuries, that image hardened into a personality. A story grew around it, and eventually that story became unquestionable. But in the Ethiopian tradition, the process stopped before that transformation was complete. To understand why, we must slow down and return to how ancient people actually used language. Prophets did not write instruction manuals for demonology. They wrote poetry. They spoke in symbols. Light and darkness were moral languages, not caste lists of supernatural beings. When Isaiah speaks of a shining one who falls from the heavens, the original audience did not imagine a horned angel tumbling through space. They imagined a king, a ruler who rose quickly, ruled arrogantly, and collapsed just as suddenly. The heavens were not geography, they were status, power, exaltation. In Ethiopian readings, this distinction is never lost. Lucifer is not treated as a proper name because the text does not require one. It functions as a mirror, not a mask, a way of saying that brilliance, when detached from humility, cannot sustain itself. The fall is not cosmic rebellion, it is historical inevitability. This is where the discomfort begins for modern readers. We are accustomed to clear villains, a single face for evil, a narrative where darkness has a throne and a ruler. But the Ethiopian preservation resists that simplicity. It refuses to turn metaphor into mythology. And that refusal changes everything. If Lucifer is not a singular enemy, then the warning of the text does not point outward, it points inward, toward rulers who mistake authority for divinity, toward societies that confuse success with righteousness, toward individuals who begin to believe their light is self-generated. This is not abstraction, it is accusation. In the ancient world, kings were often described using cosmic language. They were stars, suns, chosen lights of heaven. When they fell, the language of collapse followed the same scale. Stars falling, heavens shaken, dawn extinguished.
Ethiopian scribes understood this grammar instinctively. Their theology remained close to its Semitic roots, where imagery served ethics, not spectacle. The goal was not to populate the universe with villains, but to discipline power with memory. And so Lucifer remained an image on a page, not a throne in hell. That restraint is not a denial of evil, it is a refusal to externalize it too easily, because once evil is fully personified, it can be blamed, feared, mythologized, and safely separated from the self. But when evil remains symbolic, it becomes unavoidable. Anyone can fall from light. Any empire can rise like dawn and fade into night. Any created brilliance that forgets its source will eventually burn out. This is why the Ethiopian tradition treats the passage as warning rather than origin story. It is not interested in where a devil came from, it is concerned with how power collapses. And that concern prepares us for what comes next. Because if Isaiah is not the birthplace of a fallen angel myth, then the question remains open. Where did the idea of heavenly rebellion truly take shape? And why does Ethiopian scripture tell that story so differently? The answer lies in a book that never names Lucifer at all, and once we open it, the entire architecture of rebellion begins to change.
If words shape belief, then translation shapes destiny. The story of Lucifer did not change because scripture changed. It changed because language moved. And in that movement, something subtle but decisive occurred. The verse that stands at the center of this transformation is Isaiah 14, verse 12, a single poetic line, a lament, a taunt. In the Hebrew text, the phrase is simple and evocative. Hillel ben Shachar, shining one, son of the dawn. It is not a name, it is a description, a line of poetry aimed at a fallen ruler whose pride outpaced his power. In its original setting, Isaiah is not describing the secret history of heaven. He is mocking the collapse of earthly arrogance. The prophet speaks to an empire that believed itself eternal, Babylon, a kingdom that rose like the morning star and fell just as quickly. The language is sharp, ironic, and political. Heaven and earth are not places here. They are symbols of status and humiliation. But centuries later, the text passed through a different filter. When Jerome translated the Hebrew scriptures into Latin, he rendered Hillel as Lucifer, Lightbearer. In Latin, the word itself was not sinister. It was used for the planet Venus, for dawn, for brightness before sunrise. Yet something changed the moment the word was capitalized by interpretation rather than grammar. What had been an image began to behave like a name. In the Latin tradition, the poetry slowly detached from its historical target. The king faded, the metaphor hardened. Readers began to ask new questions the text was never designed to answer. Who was this Lucifer? Where did he come from? What did he do before he fell? Isaiah never responds to those questions, but theology does not always wait for permission. In Western Christianity, especially during the medieval period, Isaiah 14 was reread through layers of speculation. The passage was lifted out of its prophetic context and woven into a developing narrative about Satan's origin. Over time, Lucifer became the presumed identity of a fallen archangel. Pride became the motive, heaven became the battlefield, the poem became biography. But this is not the only possible reading, and it is not the oldest. In Ethiopia, the path was different. The Ethiopian Bible was not translated through Latin. It emerged primarily from Hebrew and Greek streams, carried into Gaze without the same interpretive inheritance. As a result, the text of Isaiah remained closer to its original tone, poetic, historical, moral. In Gaze manuscripts, Isaiah 14 does not introduce a demonic individual named Lucifer. It preserves the image of a fallen, shining one as a warning to rulers who elevate themselves beyond measure.
Ethiopian commentators understood the passage as a critique of political oppression and self-deification, not a revelation about the architecture of hell. This distinction is not technical, it is foundational. When a metaphor becomes a character, it invites myth. When it remains a metaphor, it demands reflection. Ethiopian tradition chose the second path. The fallen star is not an enemy to be feared, it is a mirror to be avoided. This is why Ethiopian theology consistently resists reading Isaiah as cosmic rebellion. The fall described is not an angel grasping at God's throne, it is the inevitable collapse of any authority that forgets its limits. Power is not condemned for existing, it is condemned for pretending to be divine. This reading aligns closely with early Jewish interpretation, where prophetic language is anchored in history and ethics rather than speculation about unseen realms. Ethiopia, deeply influenced by ancient Judaism, preserved that anchoring. Scripture was read as instruction for living communities, not as a map of supernatural hierarchies. And yet, a tension remains. If Isaiah is not the origin of a heavenly rebellion story, then the question does not disappear, it grows sharper. Because ancient Judaism and early Christianity spoke about angels who fell. They spoke about transgression beyond human politics. They spoke about beings who crossed boundaries and altered the course of the world. So where is that story told? And why does it look so different from the Lucifer myth that later dominated Western imagination? Ethiopian scripture answers quietly but decisively. The rebellion you were looking for was never hidden in Isaiah. It was preserved elsewhere. In a book that names angels, describes their descent, and explains the logic of their fall without ever mentioning Lucifer at all.
If Isaiah is not the birthplace of a fallen angel myth, then the story of heavenly rebellion must be sought elsewhere. Ethiopian tradition never avoided that question. It simply answered it without invoking Lucifer. The answer is found in a book that Western Christianity largely forgot, but Ethiopia preserved with care, the Book of Enoch. To modern readers, Enoch often feels disruptive. It speaks openly about angels who descended to earth, about forbidden knowledge, about boundaries crossed and consequences that reshaped the world. Yet what is most striking is not what Enoch says, but what it never says. Lucifer does not appear. There is no solitary light-bearer who rebels alone, no singular villain whose pride fractures heaven. Instead, Enoch describes a collective fall, a group of angels known as the Watchers. They descend together, they transgress together, and they fall together. Their leader is named Semjaza. Others are named individually, Ezael, Azazel. These are not metaphors, they are specific figures tied to specific acts, teaching forbidden arts, distorting justice, corrupting humanity not through domination, but through instruction and desire. The nature of their sin is crucial. They do not attempt to seize God's throne. They do not declare independence. They do not seek worship. They cross a boundary that was not theirs to cross. They abandon their assigned order. Their fall is not driven by cosmic ambition, but by choice. This distinction reshapes everything. In Ethiopian reading, rebellion is not primarily about pride, it is about violation, about stepping outside divine limits, about wanting what is not permitted, even if it appears beautiful or enlightening. Knowledge itself becomes dangerous when acquired without obedience. This is why Enoch feels so different from later Lucifer myths. The danger is not exaggerated ego, it is misplaced desire. And that difference carries ethical weight.
If evil originates in one towering villain, then responsibility can be centralized, blame can be focused, fear can be externalized. But if evil originates in collective disobedience, then the problem becomes more intimate, more uncomfortable, more human. Ethiopian theology leans into that discomfort. The Watchers are punished not as rivals to God, but as creatures who abandoned their role. They are bound, judged, awaiting final reckoning. There is no sense that they continue to rule in opposition, no eternal dualism, no competing kingdom of darkness. Order is never threatened, it is violated, then restored. This is why Ethiopian texts consistently avoid elevating any fallen being into a cosmic counterforce. Evil is real, but it is never sovereign. It operates within limits. It arises from departure, not equality. Even Satan, when he appears in Ethiopian scripture, is closer to the Hebrew concept of the adversary, an accuser, a tester, a function, not a throne. His authority is permitted, not possessed. The absence of Lucifer as a central figure is not a gap, it is a statement. Ethiopian tradition did not need a single name to explain rebellion. It had a framework that explained how order collapses without threatening divine supremacy, a framework where evil is serious but never ultimate. And this is where the meaning of rebellion shifts again. In Enoch, the Watchers fall because they refuse to remain Watchers. They desire participation where observation was commanded. They seek closeness without permission. They act without alignment. This is not ancient mythology alone. It is a pattern. Whenever boundaries are dismissed in the name of progress, whenever knowledge is detached from wisdom, whenever power operates without restraint, the same structure repeats. This is why Ethiopian preservation of Enoch matters so deeply. It does not simply add more angels to the story, it relocates the moral center. Rebellion is not spectacular, it is procedural. It happens when order is slowly ignored, not dramatically overthrown. And once rebellion is understood this way, the need for Lucifer disappears, because the warning is no longer about a single fall long ago. It is a process that can happen anywhere, in heaven, on earth, in institutions, in individuals. This prepares the ground for the next shift. If evil is not embodied in one towering ruler, and rebellion is not a singular event, then how does justice function? How is justice expressed? And why do Ethiopian apocalyptic texts describe punishment without mythology? To answer that, we must look at how Ethiopia imagined the end, not the enemy. And that leads us into a very different vision of judgment, restraint, and divine order.
Once rebellion is understood as departure from order rather than a battle for power, the entire landscape of judgment changes. Ethiopian apocalyptic texts reflect this shift with striking restraint. They speak of punishment, consequence, and accountability, but they do not construct a mythology of rivalry. There is no throne of darkness mirroring the throne of God. There is no fallen king reigning in eternal opposition. Evil is present, but it is never sovereign. In texts such as the Ethiopian Apocalypse of Peter and related traditions, fallen beings are described as bound, limited, and awaiting judgment. They are not celebrated. They are not dramatized. They do not command fear through spectacle. Their power is already curtailed. This absence is intentional. Judgment in Ethiopian theology is not framed as a cosmic war between equal forces. It is framed as restoration of order. Those who violated boundaries are restrained. Those who distorted justice are corrected. The focus remains on divine authority, not on the charisma of evil. This is why the imagery feels unfamiliar to readers shaped by medieval Western imagination.
There are no elaborate hierarchies of demons, no princes of hell with assigned territories, no detailed geography of eternal torment ruled by a singular figure. Those structures emerged later through literature, speculation, and symbolic elaboration. Ethiopia did not need them. Its apocalyptic vision was sober, ethical, controlled. Evil spirits are described as defeated precisely because they were never meant to rule. Their fate is not tragic rebellion, but failed purpose. This has profound implications for how responsibility is understood. When evil is personified into a central villain, human agency can shrink. Fear shifts outward. Blame finds a face. But when evil is understood as disordered choice within created limits, accountability remains close to home. Ethiopian liturgy reinforces this view through language rather than narrative. Hymns in Ge'ez speak constantly of light and darkness, ascent and descent, dawn and night. But these are not biographies, they are metaphors. Light represents favor, wisdom, and alignment with God. Darkness represents loss, confusion, and separation. Falling from light is not the story of one being, it is a condition that can recur. This symbolic grammar shapes worship as much as doctrine. The believer is not asked to imagine an enemy enthroned in the depths. They are asked to examine their own alignment. Have they remained within order, or have they drifted into self-exaltation? This is where Ethiopian theology quietly diverges from spectacle-driven demonology. There is no need to dramatize evil when its danger lies in its subtlety, in pride that feels justified, in knowledge that feels liberating, in power that feels deserved. This is also why Satan, when he appears in Ethiopian texts, is described in restrained terms. He accuses, he tests, he deceives, but he does not govern. He operates only within permission. He does not rival God's authority, nor does he possess an independent domain. The idea of Lucifer as ruler of hell simply does not fit this framework. It introduces symmetry where none exists. It suggests competition where there is only hierarchy. It elevates what Ethiopian theology insists must remain limited. This does not minimize the reality of evil, it clarifies it. Evil is dangerous precisely because it is not mythic. It does not always announce itself with horns and fire. It often appears as misplaced confidence, as gradual detachment, as forgetting the source of light while still believing oneself to shine. This understanding also explains why Ethiopian texts are so focused on judgment without indulgence. There is no fascination with the enemy, only certainty that disorder will not endure. Everything created is accountable. Nothing created is autonomous. And this brings us to the final contrast. If Ethiopian tradition resisted turning evil into spectacle, why did Western Christianity move in the opposite direction? Why did Europe increasingly personify darkness, assign it a face, and give it a name? The answer lies not in Scripture, but in history. And that history reshaped Lucifer into something Ethiopia never required.
The figure of Lucifer did not rise in a vacuum. It emerged slowly, shaped not only by scripture, but by culture, art, and imagination. While Ethiopia preserved restraint, Western Christianity moved in a different direction. And that divergence reveals how theology is often formed not just by what is written, but by what is emphasized. As Europe entered the medieval period, biblical interpretation increasingly unfolded within philosophical debate, allegory, and literary expansion. Scripture was read alongside classical thought. Questions multiplied. Curiosity filled the gaps left by poetry, and those gaps invited personification. Evil needed a face. Isaiah's fallen star, once a warning to kings, became a candidate.
Over time, the poetic image fused with other scattered references: serpents, accusers, adversaries. The result was not a single exegetical decision, but a gradual convergence. Lucifer became a name through repetition, not revelation. This process accelerated through art and literature. Dante's Inferno gave Lucifer a body, a location, and a function. Milton's Paradise Lost gave him a voice, a psychology, and a tragic grandeur. These works were not scripture, but they were powerful. They shaped imagination more deeply than commentary ever could. The fallen angel became memorable. The villain became compelling. Ethiopia remained largely untouched by this transformation. Geographically distant and theologically self-contained, its church did not pass through the same scholastic corridors. It did not need to reconcile biblical poetry with Greco-Roman mythology. Its texts were preserved for worship, not speculation. As a result, Ethiopian scripture never developed the elaborate hierarchies of demons that flourished in medieval Europe. There was no bureaucracy of hell, no ranks of infernal princes, no central figure ruling a shadow kingdom. This difference is not merely academic, it alters how faith relates to fear. When evil is richly dramatized, it can dominate attention. Belief becomes defensive, theology becomes reactive. The story begins to orbit the enemy rather than the source of light. Ethiopian tradition avoided this orbit. By refusing to elevate Lucifer into a rival narrative, it preserved a simpler orientation. God remains central, order remains intact, evil remains derivative. This does not mean Ethiopian scholars were unaware of Western interpretations. Contact through missionaries and later literature introduced these ideas, but they were received as commentary, not canon, as interpretations, not foundations. The distinction mattered. Because once a non-canonical image becomes central, it begins to reorganize belief. It shifts emphasis. It changes what is feared and what is trusted. Ethiopian theology resisted that shift. Instead of asking how powerful the enemy is, it asked how fragile created glory can be. Instead of tracing the origin of a devil, it traced the collapse of pride. The warning remained ethical, not mythological. This contrast exposes a deeper truth. Theology is not only shaped by texts, but by what communities choose to dwell on, what they repeat, what they dramatize, what they fear. Western Christianity, through centuries of artistic and literary development, gave Lucifer narrative weight. Ethiopian Christianity, through continuity and restraint, left him unformed. And in doing so, it preserved something older. A worldview where evil never becomes fascinating, where rebellion is not romantic, where darkness has no throne to admire, only consequence. This sets the stage for the final insight. If Lucifer is not a fallen hero and evil is not a rival kingdom, then the center of the story was never meant to be darkness at all. It was always meant to be light. And in Ethiopian Christianity, that light has only one true bearer.
When all the layers are stripped away, the Ethiopian understanding of Lucifer resolves into something unexpectedly simple. It is not a story about the birth of a devil, it is a warning about the limits of created light. Throughout Ethiopian Christianity, the focus never drifts toward constructing an enemy worthy of obsession. It returns again and again to alignment, to source, to the fragile relationship between brilliance and humility. This is why the title Lightbearer is never allowed to stand on its own. In Ethiopian Christology, there is only one light that does not fade. Christ is not merely a bearer of light, he is the light itself, the dawn that does not fall. Every other light shines only by reflection, and when reflection forgets its origin, it dims. This contrast is decisive. Lucifer, as a symbol, represents created glory attempting independence. Christ represents uncreated light given freely. One falls because it separates, the other redeems because it restores. The Ethiopian tradition did not need to elevate Lucifer into a rival figure because doing so would distort this contrast. If darkness becomes too powerful, light becomes reactive. But if light remains primary, darkness is revealed as absence, not force. This theological posture reshapes redemption itself. Salvation is not the defeat of a monster, it is the realignment of what has drifted. Victory is not measured by conquest, but by restoration. Evil is overcome not by spectacle, but by return. This is why Ethiopian texts speak so often of ascent and descent, not as journeys through space, but as movements of the heart. To ascend is to remain within order, to fall is to step outside it. History reinforces this lesson. Ethiopia watched empires rise and fall across centuries. Power accumulated, glory expanded, and then it collapsed. These cycles were not attributed to supernatural sabotage, they were read as moral instruction. Scripture and history echoed one another. The morning star rises brilliantly, it dominates the sky for a moment, and then it vanishes with the sun. The image is beautiful and merciless. This is the real meaning preserved in Ethiopian texts. Lucifer is not the name of a being to be feared, it is the name of a pattern to be recognized, a reminder that anything created, no matter how radiant, cannot sustain itself when it claims independence. This understanding does not weaken the reality of evil, it deepens it, because evil is no longer safely external, it is a potential within every created will. The warning of Isaiah therefore applies to every generation, kings, nations, institutions, individuals. Who among us believes our light is our own? And this is where the Ethiopian reading becomes unsettling. It offers no villain to hate, only a mirror to confront. In preserving this interpretation, Ethiopia did not reject Christian teaching. It preserved one of its oldest cautions, that humility is not optional, that alignment is life, that separation, no matter how luminous at first, always leads to loss. The story ends where it always belonged, not with the mythology of Satan, but with the supremacy of Christ, the true light, the dawn that never falls.